Hi, good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? Hopefully, everybody's good. And of course, welcome to our day 2 of our People Analytics Masterclass. Hey, Dale. Hey, Tamika. Small group in today. Everybody out hanging out, celebrating the end of February. All right, I'm seeing, Rika. I actually spoke to Rika yesterday, and she wasn't able to make it due to some other commitments. And okay, so I'll see Natasha coming in a bit. Good. Well, Tamika, we have a one-on-one training session today. What do you say? No worries, because today is a nice light day with all of this stuff. Ah, hey, Tamika, how are you?
Morning.
All right, today is a nice non-technical day, so don't worry, don't have any kind of fancy analysis to do and all that kind of stuff. Today we are gonna talk about data visualization and of course data storytelling. So let me get my window open here. Hold on. Screen 2. There we go. All right, so you should be seeing it. All right, perfect. Great. Hi, Padmini, how are you? Good
Hi,
morning.
good morning, everyone.
Good morning. All right, so yeah, today I was just mentioning that today is a really nice, you know, and I'm happy that the group is small. We're gonna have a lot of discussion that revolves around visualization. We're gonna talk about effective visualization, what techniques we need to use to create effective visuals, and we are also gonna talk about data storytelling. So I'm gonna introduce you all to all the stages of data storytelling, tips and techniques on how to actually tell or build that narrative, and then also how to drive that culture, that data culture, which of course incorporates how to speak the language of the C-suite, and of course how to ensure that we get that support throughout the organization. So there's quite a number of things that we're going to talk about today, and I'll try to share as much of my experiences as possible so that you all could incorporate some of those techniques into things, initiatives that you all want to push out with regard to your analytics projects, etc. All right. So today isn't going to be a ram-packed day. All right. All right. Great. Yeah. Thanks, Francis. All right. So today we're going to talk about, of course, the role of visualization and visualization. So we are going to take our lunch and stuff. So it's a more of an abridged version today because of another event that I need to get to. So we're not going to go straight to 4 o'clock today. As I said, it's a little lighter with regard to the technical items. So we're going to have a break at just over an hour from now, just for 10 minutes, and we're gonna have our lunch at 11:30 Jamaican time, for 45 minutes, and then we're gonna hit the PM session where we look at data storytelling and the data culture. Right? How do we drive that data-driven culture in the organization? All right. Now, I would love for today that you'll share with me some of your experiences when it comes to what visuals you may have shared, how impactful it was, what worked or did not work. Right. So while we're going through the items, if there was something that you would have done historically that may have worked or may not have worked, I would love for you to share that, because now that you'll start understanding some of the core principles that drive the effectiveness of communicating your data findings and being able to connect with your audience. Now that you're getting to be exposed to some of those core principles, it's important for you to see what would have been done in the past and how you're going to incorporate those in future. All right. So this is really the plan for today: visualizations, effective presentations, storytelling, and connection with your audience to drive that data-driven culture. All right. So let's dive into this. So when we think about HR visualization and of course data visualization on the whole, we're looking at understanding the role and importance of that visualization in terms of not just what you want to present, but why do you need to present it. All right. And as I said, thinking about your audience is a big deal. All right. So it's very important. There we go. I think everybody's on now. Nice. Yeah, so thinking about your audience and considering who you are speaking to. I think the last time I had asked you all about a particular radio station. Did I ask you all about that? There's a particular radio station called WIIFM. Are you all familiar with that radio station? Who's familiar with that? Or heard that before? You're not familiar with it, Shavona? Yeah? Anybody else who knows about that radio station? All right. You know what our radio station is? It's called WIIFM. What's in it for me? Don't worry, Francis. It's a global station. What's in it for me? Anytime you are communicating with someone, on many occasions we tend to go into a conversation focus on what we want to get out of it, right? So of course there's a purpose for the conversation. You might need some support, you might need somebody to do something for you, etc., right? But we have to think about within that conversation, we need to be mindful of what's in it for the person we are interacting with. Because if we need their support, there must be something in it for them. It can't just be you coming and saying, hey, I just need this, so I need you to do that. There's a reason why they need to help you. Yeah. So it's all about understanding the rationale for the conversation, understanding your stakeholders and the other parties that you are dealing with to ensure that they understand. No problems, Lynette. Good morning. That they understand that there's some purpose of that outcome for them. There's something that they will get out of it, right? So this is why when we have conversations, it's not just about saying what we need to do, but sharing why it needs to be done and what are the benefits to all parties involved, maybe just to them, but ensuring that they understand that. So effective visualization really ties back into understanding your audience and what they are looking for. And once we are able to grasp that, we'll be able to create a message that could connect with them. And once we're able to connect, chances of that support, chances of the conversation going your way in terms of getting what you need and all these things will actually improve. All right. So being mindful, and this is where emotional intelligence and empathy comes in. So when I've had conversations with folks where we talk about people analytics and analytics in general, and everybody's of the assumption that it's all about the numbers, it's all about stats and all these different things. But you'll realize as we are going through this series that there are about 5 or 6 different key types of skills that you need to be really good at analytics, right? And one, of course, is understanding the business, understanding the technical, right? Being able to grasp the HR domain, because people analytics is all about people. Communication, that's very, very key. But of course, the consultative view is another part of it. Being able to understand the business from a neutral stance, from even like an outside looking in kind of position, so that you could see all of the different stakeholder groups and try to understand what is their role, what are they looking for, what's in it for them when you are trying to implement certain initiatives, etc. So visualization is really a part of that. When we use visualization, we are able to connect to people much quicker than a conversation, much quicker than sharing data and a table and all these things, right? And then, of course, building a narrative on those visuals. So a visual on its own can only say so much. But how do we connect that visual with other visuals to build a story, create a narrative, right? Follow a linear path where there's a situation, certain considerations that need to be made, observations, some key insight, and then, of course, recommendations. So how do we follow that storytelling arc, right? And then, of course, how do we drive a data-driven culture? Getting support from different stakeholders will allow us to move forward with what we are trying to get done, because their support will lend towards progress. And how do we accommodate that from a data perspective? All right, hold on, guys. Sorry. All right, sorry about that. So, if we are building the right narratives and sharing what's in it for them, and of course, using data to do so, and accommodating certain practices that revolve around data, then we are now on our way towards building a data-driven type culture, data-driven organization. Where if you all have to rate your organization as a data-driven culture on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being people don't even know what is data, and 10 being everybody using data all the time, it's in every conversation, where would you rate your organization on that scale? 2? So people now understanding what's the definition of data there, Tamika? 4? Okay, well, that's a little better for the most part. 4? Yeah, I think okay, I will assume that with the 4, it's that there are some people who understand data, or some processes that capture some data. They're not really utilizing it as best as possible, but other processes, people don't even think about it. There are a few agencies that did, right? Okay, good. And then, of course, you see the huge disparity there, right, Lynette, in terms of the conversations they have, the initiatives they push, their progress and their outcomes. There's a huge difference there, right? With those who focus on the evidence, because data is all about evidence. There you go. Because it opens them up. They have evidence to prove what they're doing, to prove the value that they're generating. And this will, of course, gain support from, we talk about competitive advantage, right? And I've had many professionals and even students, they are getting to the understand. All right, good. Yes, that is very true, Tamika. And when you think about competitive advantage, many people think that public sector do have competition, but the competitive advantage that a ministry or a unit might get over another is really based on funding. You are competing for funding, for government funding. So if you are proving what you're doing, if you have figures to show progress, and even to forecast what you want to do and how those projects or initiatives would come in as valuable, you are gonna get support, through funding. So yeah, government agencies also compete with each other, right? So don't think competitive advantage is only for private sector. I've seen it. Right? Nice. So let's dive in. So of course we know about Flavorcraft. We have some data that we will the same Excel workbook that I had shared with you all from the first masterclass. We are also going to use that here, right? So we will be opening it up, because some of these techniques that we will discuss, I will throw them up on Power BI and show you how we could get some of these things done within the Power BI environment. All right. So yeah, the same workbook will apply. Yeah, of course, Dale, because at the end of it, I think what happens, Dale, is that the ones who use it stand head and shoulders above those who don't. So it becomes more evident that those who aren't using it need to start using it. Because before, when nobody really was using it, or some were using it, it wasn't as impactful as before. Now, let's say, with what Lynette is saying, yeah, when you have your competition or other departments or units actually using data and presenting on it, and then your department does not, it's a little more glaring that, hey, something is missing with your presentation. Where's the data? Where's the evidence? And senior management teams will ask, executives will ask, and now it drives the team to say, hey, we need to be collecting data, we need to be doing this. But then the problem is they don't have a lot of data professionals. So they start collecting some haphazard data. They kind of just giving you some raw figures, like some totals, maybe a little average here and there, but it's not really as insightful as it should be, right? And this is where, you kind of grow into it. You grow from the descriptive stuff into some more diagnostic, and, even at some point you'll start to predict, right? So, but it is a slow type of journey. The wheels are turning fairly slowly, and you start realizing, perfect. Yes, Lynette. So the pressure is on. But that's a good thing. That's an excellent thing, right? And once you start you get forced into it. Even if right now it takes a while, if it takes a while to compile, you start learning now, okay, the questions you're going to keep asking. And this is what analytics is all about. It's basically, okay, how do we improve this process? How do we make this faster? Right? Are we collecting the right information, or the right data points? And what do we need to be talking about? So, and let's say, Lynette, as you start providing that data on gender representation, the spread across the organization at different levels, further questions are now going to be asked. And as those new questions now feed off of your original data, you start realizing you want more and more and more. We need to, we weren't collecting age groups. Okay, we need to be collecting that now. We weren't collecting location. Okay, that's something we need to collect now. And you just start growing until it reaches. Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, Dale. And that's it. And that's it. The more you capture, and I think when I talk about the data culture later, Lynette, you'll start seeing, okay, how do we get to that point where we get the support? Because you aren't the only person who will have to be capturing that, right? That is something that's captured through processes. So everybody involved in a process will be generating data. So you'll have to ensure that these folks, all of these stakeholder groups, will be capturing data and the right data that you need, so it funnels back to you. So it's not the responsibility of one person. When we're looking at a data culture, is the responsibility of everyone, right? So I think you all would have seen this slide before in one of my previous workshops. So we talk about what a visualization should be doing, right? And we talk about effective visualization. It should actually save you time, because when you are looking at a visualization, you should get the message fairly quickly, right? It should have a purpose. There's a reason why this visual is here on the screen, because it's based on questions that you might get from management, from other team members. The questions now would be actually the input for this visual to be created. So this visual is actually the response to the question. So the answer is this, right, in a visual form. It should include only relevant content. So if somebody's asking, let's say for gender, for instance, we are going to have like a donor chart with gender showing percentages of the gender spread across the organization. You're not going to have age groups running in there, right? Or you're not going to have some tenure figures in there, because that's not answering the question. That's irrelevant. So you only want to include relevant content. And this is why I see many analytics folks, when they now kind of get it into it, they want to hit some very complex models. They want to do a lot of things, and they're very excited to try to throw everything. But a message becomes clouded. We talk about all those irrelevant content, all those additional charts. Basically, from a marketing and communication perspective, that is noise. It is taken away from the focus on the answer to the question that was posed, right? So keep it simple. I think I mentioned this even in our last masterclass when I did some of the charts and I did some adjustments to them. Keep it simple. And once you keep it simple, you allow for focus. So the more you clean out as much as possible, you are doing something called we're going to talk about it today too, pre-attentive processing. It's basically the way the brain works, right? Of course, encoding the right data and information. How do we encode? Encoding is based on, if you notice, we have an area chart here with a fill, we have a line graph, and we have some bars, and we have the donut, etc. Each of these, if we use the same data to show all of these things, we have encoded the data differently. So we've encoded it based on height for the columns. We've encoded it based on over time, the line itself. We've encoded it in terms of area with the area chart, and we've encoded it with regard to composition or contribution to the whole. So and this is shape and size and color. So these are different types of encoding. Whenever we take our figures and we turn them into shapes, we turn them into bars and columns and lines, we are encoding it, right? And certain types of data are more effectively encoded in one form over another, right? This is why when we talk about, line charts are suitable for a certain type of analysis, Bars and columns are better for another type of analysis. So you can't really use any chart for any type of situation. We have to choose the right type of chart for the right situation, and we will talk about that today too. All right. So appropriate visuals. Whenever you are looking at, for the most part, we are doing a lot of comparison, right? Or we're looking at distribution. So there's a lot of things that we have to speak about whenever we are having that discussion. So think about your actual discussion with someone, no data involved. Let's say we're having a general conversation and the questions are, okay, how, what's our headcount across departments, right? And that's tied back to things like distribution, or we could even do a comparison on it, right? When somebody asks about, okay, how was sales over the last year, right? Over the quarters of 2023, we are looking at data over time. So for the most part, line charts or area charts are usually the more popular ones because they're most effective with regard to sharing that message and building a story from it. All right. If we're looking at, okay, connection between, let's say, age and performance. If we're looking at that and we're asking ourselves, okay, younger employees more productive than older employees, or let's say tenure, for instance. If we're looking at comparing and looking at that correlation, we could do things like bubble charts or scatter plots. So we kind of show how all the points are plotted together in relation to each other, and we start seeing if there's a relationship, right? So we can't do that with a bar chart, for instance. So answering certain types of questions would rely on certain types of visuals. So you have to sit now and think about the most effective visual that could relay that message, that could communicate that message to your audience in terms of those who would have asked that question. All right. So this is like one of the simpler ones I've come across. But if you think about it, guys, for the most part, and my experience over, let's say, the last 5 or 6 years, working Power BI, doing different charts and all these things, it really comes down to some simple ones, right? The bar, the column, the line, the donut, the scatter at some point, right? And then even just the raw figure. Communicating just the singular figure, like a singular value, is also useful, right? So this is why you notice, like within Power BI, when I was doing my dashboard the last time, we had a couple cards. So having a card with a raw figure, a singular figure, which allows for focus, we could just simply share that. So sometimes there's no need to just have a fancy chart, but just have a simple card with a space with the figure on focus. So if we're looking at, let's say, a turnover rate, for instance, or the head count, that's a singular value, right? We could start, if the questions get more complex, we could start doing more things with it. So we could start showing like a variance figure. Like, did it increase over the last year? Is it 10% more than last year? Has it reduced over the year before, etc.? But in many cases, you could just keep it very simple, and sometimes just the figure will answer the question, all right, without the need for any fancy visuals and all these things. Yeah. What have been like the most popular charts you all have used over the years when you're all trying to display data? Does it really fall under those 4 that I highlighted? The bar, the column, the line, the donut or the pie chart. When last have you all used a pie chart? There's certain little rules for pies, right? And this is why the donut chart actually supersedes the pie right now. Because the donut accommodates a little more information to be shared. Like a central point, you could share a central point, or like a central figure within the middle of the donut. And by having more values being shared in there rather than just the pie, because a pie could only accommodate maybe 5, if so much, 5 different values. But the problem is, the way we cannot determine the size of the pie. So we won't be able to discern if one is more than the other without data values. And when you start putting in data values, it sometimes starts to get messy. So the donut actually is a little more useful because it allows for a central space to share that information in between. So you could drop in another figure inside the middle of the donut, right? And still have your data values on the outside. Yeah, bar, line, and pie charts for monthly reporting. What we use the pie chart for, pardon me? How much data elements you usually have in a pie chart? Is it more than 4, 5?
Yes, that is to show the manpower levels in each division within the organization.
So you're showing it like in terms of you want them to compare to each other, or you're just showing how they contribute to the whole workforce.
Basically, how they contribute to the whole workforce.
You could probably try a donut and see if it makes a little more sense. And
Okay.
yeah, because I've done I've done donut charts with probably about 6 or 7 different items, and it's a little more. The effectiveness really ties back to the fact that you could only focus on just the curve itself rather than trying to figure out the size of the section of the pie. So there's some actual research out that talks about the depth of the pie chart, right? And this is why you'll notice that the pie chart doesn't fall into this whole thing altogether. So try to the donut, and if you think about, let's say, think about the spread of the workforce, right? If you're looking at the spread across all of those divisions, if there's an average value in terms of the average size of the manpower per division, you could probably put the average in the middle there. If you think it's going to add value to the visual, right? Do you think that could add value, like the average spread or the average, let's say the average head count or something per division? Or maybe you could put the whole head count in the middle there.
Possibly. Yeah, I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. So like if you put the whole head count, so let's say the head count was 300 people, right? So your head count was 300. And when you share that now, and of course you'll have the data values there. So you're showing that, okay, 25% is this division, 15% is over here. People will now be able to compare that figure against the head count, and they'll have a general idea how much manpower is there in within the different divisions. So it's just something to consider. So and this is the thing. There's no like perfect visual. We are looking at the most appropriate visual, right? We're looking at the most effective, but that doesn't mean it's gonna work all the time, because it's of course based on your audience and based on what they are looking for, right? So sometimes you try a visual, you say, okay, I put in a technique here, and you try to make it more effective, and then you're gonna get feedback. So the feedback you're gonna get would be whether or not it was effective, right? And use the feedback to twist it up, because sometimes you dump in the head count in there, right? And you say, ah, boy, this looking good, real effective, right? I understand. But then somebody might look at it and say, um, I didn't think that I didn't really understand why you put headcount in there. Maybe, and sometimes they will give you a suggestion. Maybe you could put the average distribution. Is the average per division, and they'll be like, oh, okay. And then you drop that in, and then you're gonna get feedback again. So it is an iterative process. It's a process that we all learn, because you have to understand your audience. So understand what your audience is looking for. This is why sometimes you do a draft, you send it before, you get their feedback on whether or not it makes sense, or what. And sometimes it might be you are answering a question that they probably didn't even have at all. And like how you said earlier, didn't think about putting something in the center. And they'll be like, oh wow, I didn't think about having that there, but look, it makes so much sense. Right? So you will get feedback like that. I have gotten feedback like that, where I just did something randomly and say, oh yeah, this looking like it'll make sense. And then the feedback was like, wow, this is real good. Put it in the front there, put it in the top corner, because we want everybody to see that and pay attention to it. So as you go along, working with your different stakeholder groups, working with your audience, understanding what they need will actually help you in terms of creating some of the more effective visuals for them. Yeah. So here are some of the key principles that you'll need to follow when it comes to creating visuals. You all remember these types of chats? Let me see how old you guys are. You all remember charts like this? Yeah, this was original Excel, right? Like way back in the day. I think up to even now, right? If you're creating a bar chart, sometimes you get something looking like this, right? And there's so much things going on here, right? There's so much things that we need to take a look at and make changes on. Because like, what do y'all think? What do y'all think right now adds to the clutter within this chart? Are you all seeing the clutter? What's the clutter? What makes this chart a bit ineffective? What are some of the things that you all might want to change here? Project repeated, right? So we have different project names, right? So the word project here, we could just keep the numbers or the IDs for the projects. Is there a need for, let me see who else dropping in here. Right, it's unclear what it's really depicting. So yeah, they're talking about error rates. But usually an error rate is based on percentage, right? It's not based on numbers, right? X-axis topic projects, right? What about that background though? Is that background really necessary? All that fancy stuff there, all that gray and all those lines and all these things? There's actually a guy called Tuft. He has some principles. Now, these principles I'm sharing with you all are actually based on some of his principles, right? His foundation principles. And back in the day, they were sharing like these visual items on printed documents, and they used print presses and all these things back in the day. They didn't have laser jet printers and all these things. So he was talking about the ink ratio, right? And if it is you want to have this gray background and these lines, there's a lot more ink that's being used here. And that in itself is wastage. So when they're looking at visuals from the traditional point of view, you want to reduce that as much as possible. So you get rid of, I would definitely get rid of the gray. I would definitely get rid of the lines. I would, and I think you all know me already, right? What would I do with this axis? Let me see who remembers what I was doing last month in our first masterclass. What would I have done with this axis, this y-axis? And what would I have done? Like there are two things I would have done. The composition bar. Oh, you're talking about Tamika on the bar itself, right? So I would have definitely taken out this y-axis here. So everything on the vertical I would have taken out. So all you'll see would basically be the bars alone behind a white background, in front of a white background, and well, of course, the project numbers, right? And put the data labels on each bar. Because think about it, guys. Watch this, right? Watch how simple this is. Project 7. What's the value for project 7? Or what's the project value for what's the value for project 8? You are going to find yourself first looking for project 8 and then having to go across here to see what does 8 represent. So 8 is 6. And then project 7, you do the same thing. You go across here, oh, it's 2. You know how much time you're wasting there? That's ineffective. If we have data values on each bar, how much faster would it be for you to identify the numbers or the rates, as they say here? So I could easily see 2 immediately on the bar, 6 immediately on the bar. And that in itself makes this visual much more effective, right? So, and then of course, what's the purpose of a bar chart? What is the purpose of a bar chart? So let me go back. Let me go back one here. Bar charts, if you notice, so if you kind of look here, we're seeing group bar here for distribution. Yeah, that's one. We're seeing a bar chart showing data over time, but it's not data over time. But we also seeing a bar chart here for comparison. So bar charts accommodate comparative data, and it allows us to now compare one project to the next. So if we're looking at this visual, we are now basically, the purpose of this chart, what we would assume would be we are comparing the error rates across different projects within an organization, right? And what could be something we could do? Have any numbers above each one? Yes, we could compare. But what might be another question you all might have on this chart? What do you think might be a question? I'm forcing you all to reverse engineer this. Even if I make this an effective visualization, what would have been the question that might have been raised that would have caused some analysts to create this chart? Think about what would be the question they're trying to answer by having this chart. And this is something that you could do with every single visual that you have created, stuff that you're creating in your reports. Go back now and think, what is the question that you are trying to answer here with this particular chart? So what do you all think might be a question they're asking here? Isn't it, okay, what are the error rates by project? What are the error rates by project, right? That could definitely be one. But what's another question? Like, there might be one or two other questions that might be a variation of that question. What do you all think? Anybody? Don't afraid to know. There are no wrong answers here today. What could be another question? Isn't another question possibly let me see. There we go. Efficiency inaccuracies. Right. Okay, good. Nice. Thanks, Tamika. So tie back there to efficiency or inaccuracies. Another question might be, well, what is our most efficient project? Yeah? Or what was the project with the lowest level of accuracies? So I'm assuming, because even with the encoding here, there should be percentages. Because anytime I think about a rate is basically a percentage because a ratio. It's tied to a ratio, and there we have a percentage. So I'm assuming that, let's say, project 1 has about an 87% error rate, and project 2 has a roughly a 20% error rate. So another thing that we could do based on that second question would be what? We could possibly sort these projects by error rate. So whether it be by the lowest or the more efficient or the most efficient, tied, and then going all the way to the least efficient. So this way we could rank and we could, do a better comparison, right, across the projects rather than looking, okay, how quickly would it take you to find, let's say a project somewhere in the middle, like an average error rate. We're noticing that project 2 and project 7 have the lowest, right? 7 is a little more than 2, and project 1 has the highest level error rate. But we just noticing because of the heights. But if we sort them, we could actually have a rank. Because how easy is it for you all to tell me, let's say, the third or fourth most efficient project here? Think about how much work you have to do now sifting through that visual to tell me the third or fourth ranked in terms of lowest error rate, right? So when you understand what are the questions being asked, organize and put steps in place within your visual to seek to answer those questions as quickly as possible. So it is possible that, by asking about error rate, somebody want to know which one has the highest and which one has the lowest. So this is why sorting these columns would have been useful as well, right? So you all see when we are thinking about a visual, it's not just about throwing the data up and say, okay, great, we have this visual and that's going to work. It's about ensuring that we select the right visual, right? And clean it up to allow for focus and very quick response to whatever it is was being asked, that would have defined the visual in the first place. So first of all, what are the rules that show the data? So we show the data, make sure that we have the core data in, right? The second is we reduce the clutter. Remove all these additional elements that are really cluttering up. Because look, nobody told me about the legend yet. Tell me about this legend. We need this yet? There's nothing that requires a legend, right? This is clutter. Imagine you remove this error rate legend, how much extra space you get for your actual visual itself. So reduce the clutter, get rid of anything that don't make sense. Think about it. We're looking at this. Now we will look at it and say, oh yes, there's only error rates here, so it doesn't matter. But then we wasted precious time looking at the legend and determining whether or not it was useful as the audience. So this isn't effective. It took us away from what we should be looking at. All right. Integrating text and graphics, I'll talk about that. And then I had mentioned earlier about pre-attentive processing. All right. So let's dive into this now and let's see. So when we think about charts, sometimes we do compile a lot of data, right? While charts do bring a lot of content together, we want to also enhance it by allowing for focus, by showing the data that they need, right? Now, Let's say, for example, this was a chart which was showing, let's say, sales and profitability by country, let's say in the CARICOM, right? Of course, there's a lot more countries here than are in the CARICOM. So let's say CARICOM and Latin America, Caribbean and Latin America, right? So we have all of these countries. But let's say the focus, our organization, we got all this data, and it's really nice, right? To show, well, we have all this data. But the focus of the question was tied towards, let's say, Trinidad, Jamaica, and St. Lucia, for instance. And if the question was focused on these three territories, while it is tempting to show the three territories, amongst all of these others, you want to be able to add focus and show the data itself. And you don't want to just put Trinidad and Jamaica and St. Lucia, because you also want to add some context. Remember, we talked about context in our last session, right? It's important to add context. So if we put these three countries alone and show them in relation to each other, the next question might be, well, is it good? Is the performance good compared to what the general should be? So having these other countries and their data involved will give us context to show where do these countries stand in relation to all of these others. All right. So it is important to, while we put a lot of data in, we also try to put a little more clarity to answer the question that was posed. I think I had used in our last session when we created the bar and the donor charts, etc. I had created focus colors for some elements, and I had used gray for the others, because you're using gray and a mid-level of gray to do two things. One is to appreciate the fact that there is other data, right? But secondly, is to also highlight the fact that it's not the focus of the visual. So we appreciate the fact that there is additional data here, but it's not the core focus of the visual. The visual is focused on these three countries. Yeah. So we do read charts, right? From top left to bottom right, and we try to figure out, well, what's this visual all about? And if we have to make a second or third pass, then it's not an effective visual. Think about it. If you look at this visual here and it's highlighting, let's say, sales and profitability by territory, and if you look at the second one where it highlights the three countries, you can see that this is much more effective, right? It's a much more effective visual because it allows you to directly glance at what your focus should be. And this is an example of pre-attentive processing, right? So you will see some of the examples I use, but this is actual pre-attentive processing in practice, where we allow for the brain to connect with the data immediately, and it makes it much more impactful. All right. Now, secondly, reducing clutter. When we look at the first chart here, any kind of distracting items from the data. Remember, the first principle was show the data. Show the data. Everything else is unnecessary, right? So we're trying to answer the question. Let's say the question being posed here is, let's say these are sales by different groups or participation levels by different groups. And if that is what the visual is seeking to provide insight on, participation level by various groups, then why do we need to put this fancy pattern on the column? Why do we need all these grid lines? Why do we need 3D rendering here? Yeah, these are all distractions from the core point. Y'all ever try to speak to a senior manager about something and ever got kind of stopped or paused in your tracks, and they kind of ask you in a nice way, sometimes in a nice way, what's the point of the conversation? You'll ever get pulled up like that? You're trying to go into all the details, all the fancy stuff, and then you just kind of get pulled up like, hey, um tell me, let's just get to the point here. What is it? What's the end result? Was the purpose? Was the outcome? Just get straight to the point. There's no need to give the long story. There's no need to give the long story. Just get to the point. And what happens, you see, when you're having a conversation like that, and you add in all these elements, you're hitting the rationale, you're justifying, you're doing all that. What you're doing is actually adding clutter to the conversation. So look at your visuals and think about it. Okay, what do they need to know? What is the data they need to be seeing? And when you look at your visual, is it showing what they need to see, or are there elements that will distract them? And listen, guys, when we think about distractions, if you realize something here, aren't you getting basically the same message from both charts? Because listen, I'm talking about like milliseconds here, right? I'm not talking about like minutes or hours difference in terms of understanding a visual. But what we're trying to say is, when you want to have an effective visual, you need to get straight to the point, right? And straight to the point means you don't want to provide other things that will distract them, even if it is like a minute distraction, couple milliseconds distraction, because you may not only be showing one visual. You may have a collection of visuals within a space that they need to be looking at. So if you provide, and like I'm seeing about 3 or 4 different distractions here, elements of clutter. If you have 4 visuals, each with 4 elements of clutter, you're looking at 16 points that will distract them. And I don't think you'll want that, right? Because it takes away from you providing an effective message to your audience. And sometimes you aren't there to discuss it. Sometimes it's just something that they're going to get like this. So without you there to try to declutter through your direct pointing of certain things, it's not going to help them. It's not helping them if they get this on its own with a lot of items that may distract them. Makes sense, right? So even this can be cleaned up some more. Like, and I think you all know me already, I would have removed this axis, put in data values for each point, and that would have made it much more effective as well. But they're just showing you simply removing the grid lines, removing the 3D elements, and cleaning it up. Sometimes it's as simple as flattening your graphic. Flattening your graphic keeps it as simple as possible. You'll recall, like on the web, when you all were browsing for a period of time, I think it was about maybe 5-8 years ago, there was this kind of flat movement where you're seeing all these icons got flat, no shadows, before you were seeing all these fancy things with drop shadows and multi-layers, and then all of a sudden everything just got flat. Have you all ever noticed that? Even with applications and even on Android and some of these things, you notice that some of the icons you have, they remove the drop shadows, all the fancy 3D looking stuff, and everything got flat. Because from a design perspective, flat visuals, flat graphics are actually much more effective because you get to the point faster. Yeah, all these logos, how Microsoft changed all their stuff. And not only Microsoft, but many other applications, you start noticing that the icons became very flat, very clean. Because the more you clean, because another point here with like effective visuals is tied towards white space. And white space is really like, if I don't have anything like right up on this and right, very close and tight, if it's not tightly squeezed, I am accommodating. I'm pretty much accommodating for focus, right? And if I accommodate for focus, then they're gonna get the message. It's all about ensuring that your audience gets the message. Yeah. So integrating text and graphics on many I've seen on many occasions where certain charts, people they use the legend on the side and they put a lot of text outside of the graphic. So they try to keep the graphic as clean as possible. Yes, clean is good in some instances, but when you think about context, in many cases, it's a lot more useful rather than having text on the side explaining a graphic and this clean graphic on the side. Like, it basically separating them in some instances can work. But if we take like a whole 2 paragraphs of text and merge it into your graphic through simple titles, subtitles, through simple highlighting, it actually does improve the effectiveness of the visual. So like having a simple title, a title that makes sense, right? A title that is valid for the visual and connects the visual to like, the question that's being asked. So let's say the question here was, let's say comparison of sales over a period of years by different products or something, right? So the series might be different categories of products. And your chart title should provide insight on the answer to that question, like align to the question. So if the question was uh, comparing different product sales, your title here might be sales by category, and you highlight the categories or something like that. So the label for the y-axis might be, you know, the sales, the key sales points, and then of course the period of time, etc. And you have the series that will highlight the different categories. So by incorporating that, there's very little need to have a whole bunch of text on the side, right? Having additional data labels, I think, would have here, like maybe the average for each one on the side here, right? Average sales over period. That would be insightful too, right? Because while we are seeing the gap or the comparison, right, we would probably want to know, we cannot discern what is the difference in the gap here. You see, we'll have to go and manually look at this gap, but then that gap, you'll realize that that gap changes over time, right? So this is why it'll be useful to show like maybe an average figure, or even the average variance. You all seen that? Because questions that you might have if you are looking at this chart, if this is your chart, you know, that you are sharing with a manager, that manager might be thinking, okay, yeah, I'm seeing this product selling more than this one, but by how much? What's the average difference here? What's the variance generally? All right? Or what's the percentage? So we can start thinking about these things, because your audience, think about it, guys, your audience will always have more questions than you are providing. The answers that you have provided now would be based on historical questions that they had. What you will have to think about, and what will make an effective visualization, is also thinking about what further questions they might have as a result of seeing something like this, or providing as much insight as you could. So like using averages. So a big tip here, guys. When you think about data itself, and we think about central tendency, you're familiar with what are measures of central tendency? Let me see. Measures of central tendency. They are all M's. They're all M's. No? All right. So there are three M's. It's, and here now, when I share it, you'll be like, what? That's what they call it. Mean, median, and mood. Those are the measures of central tendency. So average, midpoint, and frequency. So average, midpoint, and frequency. Yeah, you know them, right? But you never heard them being called measures of central tendency. The reason why we call them measures of central tendency is because they all kind of focus to the midpoint of your data, to the middle of your data. So the average kind of works out a middle point, but it's impacted by, you know, the outliers, you know, the extreme values. The median is the midpoint. So we lay all 101 values there. Value 51 is the midpoint as the median. And it's sometimes different from your average. And then mode is frequency. So if you look at like a bar chart like this, or you'll know a histogram, this is where you're going to get frequency. So it's going to show you how much of one item, how much of the other item, and how it's distributed. So bar charts will actually show you mode, because you can highlight, okay, where's the largest division in your organization, was the highest head count for certain points, etc. Right? So central tendency is those midpoints. Right? And there's also another one called measures of dispersion. Yeah, listen, I don't want to give all a headache today, but measures of dispersion is basically tied to how your data is spread, because dispersion is spread, right? Anybody familiar with those? Okay, so we're talking about variance, standard deviation, and range. Those are what we call measures of dispersion. So range basically will show, okay, where's the range of values from the lowest to the highest? So how is it spread? So like if you're looking at heights, adult heights, or let's say sales figures, right? So you have sales, or let's say performance scores. Performance scores might be a little easier. So performance scores, you have a range of values that will give you performance, right? 1 to 5. So that's the range because the lowest point is 1, the highest point is 5. You might have an average performance figure. Yeah, there might be an average performance. Hold on. Let me see if I could get my, let me get a note up here. Something that I could share afterwards. Right. So we have central tendency, right? Which is mean, median, and mode. So that's why you see, you all will be hearing me talking about, a visual and, think about, using an average figure and talking about, the highest point. And we get these things in, well, and it's really not about maths. It's really, okay, this is the data where it's showing, right? So we just kind of pull from it. So some of the things you'll want to think about, and especially when you're sharing insight, because when you're doing analytics, it's not just about pulling the figures, but it's about, there's a reason why this figure is important. So we get figures that will, can I make these larger, boy? I'm not sure if this note thing will make it larger, but I will share these notes anyway, right? So the median is the midpoint and the mode is the frequency, right? Now, after we get like the midpoint, and that's why when you think about a visual, that's why like how I was sharing with this visual here, you could probably share like the variance here or the average variance between the two, right? What's the gap? What's the gap here? Because there's a reason why I might show series 1 versus series 2, right? Series 1 is performing much better than series 2, I'm assuming, if this was like sales or performance figures. But the next question you might usually get is by how much, right? How much? So you sharing this with us, this doing better than the other, but on average, how much it doing better? Because we need to get an idea of what is the gap we need to fill, right? And of course, this is where these simple things come in. And that's why I would add something like this, like an average figure in between the average variance, right? And as a measure. So when we think about dispersion or how things are spread, we're looking at variance, and variance would always be the difference between 2 points, right? We're looking at and the difference from the average. So that's why mean or average has always been a popular calculation for analysts, because that average figure is used for dispersion measures too, right? So it's like variance is the difference from average. So if the what's the average performance score where you all work? If you're using like a 5-point scale, maybe like what, 3.5? Let's say 3.5 is the average score. And we have 5 employees that we're looking at. And they're scoring from 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, right? The variance would basically be the difference from their scores and the average. So the guy who scored like 2.5 is a -1 variance. The guy who scored 4 is a 0.5 positive variance. So it's really the variance is the difference from the average. Just the straight subtraction from the average. Whether it's higher or lower than the average, you get this figure, right? So it could be a positive or a negative variance. Then you have standard deviation. This is basically the square of the average. So the easy way to say it is the square of the variance or variances. So we don't just take it away, but we get the square value. So it's always a positive value. And what it shows, guys, what do we think when we think about deviation? Like what comes to mind when the word deviation comes in? Forget maths or anything. When we hear the word deviation, what comes to mind? It different or it going off, right? There's some shift, right? Yeah. So deviation shows that, okay, we have this middle point, that this is the roadway, but if somebody start or a lane, like a lane on the highway, and if you start deviating, it means that you're swerving out from the boundaries of the highway and all these things, from the midpoint where you should be. So deviation looks at how much is it different, how different is your data. So you have data points, and what's the the standard deviation will barely be looking at what is this kind of average point of variance from all the different points. So we might, if I tell you all like the average height of, let's say, females in Trinidad is 5'4", with a standard deviation of 6 inches. So it means that if I take 200 females from Trinidad and measure their heights, they're gonna range between 4'4", no, 4 foot. If we look at 6 inches, 4'10" and 5'10". Because if 5'4" is the average and the deviation is 6 inches, you're looking at, on both sides, there's roughly, that deviation from the average. So that's where standard deviation comes in. But when you start thinking about data like that, you could integrate these things into your visuals. So it's not just about showing them the raw data, but you could show a few of these measures and help them understand, hey, this thing always shifting, there's a wide range over here. And here what, when you think about like process data, hiring data, etc., and you see a lot of variation like that, it means that there's sometimes some inconsistencies that you need to deal with. Because the reason why we look at central tendency and dispersion is really to see levels of consistency. Is it consistent? Is it changing? And when things are changing across categories or even changing over time, this is when we start exploring why. So this is usually like the first step we start digging into, okay, I'm seeing a lot of variation. Why is there variation? Yeah. So I just kind of taking you all back, but these are very useful points to incorporate into your visuals, right? So this is basically the value represented from lowest to highest value, right? So yeah, when you think about your visuals, sometimes you would just want to incorporate these things. And you may have heard me talking about, hey, yeah, incorporate that, incorporate this, incorporate that. And you'll be like, oh, how he thought about that? Why he thinking about that? Oh, that's a good idea. I didn't think about it. So the reason being, these simple measures are the things that, you would be, while we are digging into the data, we will see those things. So sometimes we would like to share these if it can prove effective for our audience to understand the data a little better, right? So these are just some of the techniques that I would kind of drop in. And in many cases, I would say like 8 times out of 10, it was effective. People appreciated it a little more, and they started looking at it and say, hey, I really didn't think about that. And, hey, this makes sense now. And you start getting more feedback from them, which actually lent, which sometimes lent to you getting more work. Because they might say, hey, well, redo this chart for me and integrate this for me because we want to now think about those things. But actually, that's a good thing, right? Because there's an appreciation of what you bring to the table, and there's that trust that you are also understanding what's going on, and you are helping convey the message not only to them but to maybe even a wider audience. Yeah. So you see how important visuals are, right? And some of these principles, if you, as I said, what you'll need to do is go back to some of your visuals and take a look at them and see, are you answering the question? How clean is it? Are there any elements of clutter that you could clean up? I actually don't mind if you all send me a couple of your charts and, maybe say, hey, Kerron, take a look at this. And I this was what it was originally, and this is what I did. And, if there are any further things that you could look at in terms of modifying that chart. So I don't mind actually looking like that. Yeah, Tamika, I know how it is. But in many cases, I'll tell you this, right? Sometimes doing that and doing the extra work saves you work later down the road. Because in many cases, what you end up doing is answering questions that they didn't have yet. So you kind of hit that one time and you are answering that question immediately, dealing with other things that they may have found insightful, and that's that. And it now becomes part of their de facto report, which you already incorporated. So you don't have a lot of work to do afterwards, just to pull the data the same way. The visual is just updates as you go along, and that's it. And as I said, it does build your credibility, because part of the whole thing is really all about that, right? Showing that you understand what's going on, that you are able to convey the message effectively to those guys who need it. And then, of course, they are able to now appreciate what you bring to the table. So it's all about building your reputation and, of course, adding value. to the whole process. Yeah. But yeah, Tamika, I totally feel the workload part, right? Yeah. So this is the pre-attentive processing item I was talking about earlier, right? It's the way that we think. It's the things that we notice. So like even before, like, have you all ever realized as soon as a slide opens up or a visual open up, even before you hear from the person or you read about the visual, you already went through that visual in your head, and there's certain things that jumped out at you, right? So the things that you would notice immediately, that's tied towards pre-attentive processing. And if we understand this, we could incorporate that into our visuals so that we could get our audience to pick up on the key items immediately, right? So look at something here. I think you all may have realized that I used some of these techniques the last time we were talking about visuals. You all remember I used things like color, right? And I was highlighting the fact that certain things will be gray, certain things will be a more focused color. So color is something that jumps out at you immediately, right? Shapes, using something a different shape or a different size actually does also jump out at you immediately. Did so tell me, did these things jump out at you all as soon as I open the slide? Which ones jumped out first? And I think you all probably started from the top here because we naturally will go along this direction, right? Which one do you think jumped out at you the most, like the fastest? The shape and color? Yeah. What about the enclosure? Enclosures too are highly effective. Eh? Yeah, the enclosure, yeah, Shavana. Color and enclosure, yeah. These are things that jump out very, very quickly, right? These others also work as well, but they are a little more subtle. They're a little more subtle in terms of orientation and positioning. They're slightly more subtle, but you see things like color, enclosures, and shapes, sizes as well, right? And these are the types of what we'll call encoding, as I was mentioning earlier. So we talk about lines, distance, width, size, color, right, and shape, etc. These are all types of encoding. So if it is you want to highlight something, you could enclose it. You could format it slightly differently. You could use a different saturation or a totally different color, right? So I've used a lot of charts with different levels of saturation that highlight, the level of saturation will determine, its rank, right? So like with bar charts, you could do that, especially if you want to keep like a certain color theme, right? Density, this is title was like things like scatters and things. Hardly you're going to find things like curvature being used, but this is more for line charts. So you can actually put in your line charts. You can make the line smooth, or you can make the line direct, point, very angular, right? So you could do that with your lines, right? Or you can make it curved. And based on the level of curvature, it will dictate, either a very steep or a sharp increase or a sharp decline, that kind of thing. Now, these are a lot of simple things that we do all the time that we never really took on, right? We never really paid attention to. But it highlights how your brain actually processes visual items, right? So if you understand how the brain does it and how we do it instinctually, then it will help in terms of how we incorporate these techniques for the visuals that we are providing to others. So if we want them to focus on this point, highlight the point, right? If I think the last time we were looking at an example where I was saying, okay, sales and marketing, I want to highlight sales and marketing because the discussion revolves around sales and marketing. So I colored that bar differently and I put all the others in gray. So that would have been the first thing, a color change, and then of course it would have been saturation because gray really is a less saturated type color. So I use both techniques, right, to highlight what's happening. You could actually outline groups of items, or you could put in a shape and a box and highlight a space within a line graph. So a line chart over a period of time, you could put a box and enclose, let's say Q4 of 2023 and highlight that and show, okay, this is the period where there was a lot more sales or this is where we had a decline. And then you start explaining why. So we could build our narrative and get people to focus on certain things. So you might have 3 years of sales data, but you're showing just specifically that quarter in 2023 and why, that was highlighting. This is the area of focus. This is what we're talking about today. Not what we performed in the past, but right now, Q4 2023, this is what happened. So you could use enclosures and these things. So these are just some simple techniques to help you all understand, okay, this is how we do things and how we could capture our audience very, very quickly. Any of these techniques you're already using? Or any of these techniques you're kind of thinking right now, some of the charts you have, I could just kind of drop that in because I think it'll make it a little more effective. What y'all think? Anything here jumped out at y'all? That this is certainly something that you could use in some of the charts, some of the reports that you're doing right now? Talk to me now. The sharpness. Yeah, sharpness is good too. Tamika.
Hey, I'm just thinking this. We learned to do some of these things in Excel, right? But there has been a sharp evolution since those beginning days. What software would you suggest we use now?
Power BI.
Yes, I'm getting familiar with that one. I've actually taken the time to familiarize myself. So I'm gonna start from beginning, but I hope
Mm-hmm.
that it won't be a case where I've overreached and it's really beyond me. But I'm encouraged that I should start, and
Yeah,
then it will get a little easier as you go along.
yep,
So I'm hoping for the best outcome. It's just
definitely.
that it's
Mm-hmm.
go
Yeah,
ahead, go ahead,
you
go
go,
ahead.
you go ahead, Tamika. You go ahead.
It's just that what has happened is a lot of persons who were in HR, they were always the persons who persons come to throughout the course of the day. So the time that they have to dedicate to these things, though they know that they should be doing it, they never got the chance to do it because literally your days are disrupted by
Yeah.
grievances, requests, inquiries, directions, consultations. But that part of the job is not remembered when time
Mm,
passes.
yeah.
So my concern is I know I have to go like on an accelerated pace now, but then how best do I do it without being overwhelmed?
Yeah. I think it's a balance of two things, right? It's a balance of two things to answer that question. One is yes, you want to learn. Uh, oh, Tamika, you have a lot of background noise while you there.
I will I will
Maybe.
I will mute it then.
Okay, thanks. It's really a balance of two things. One is yes, you want to progress and learning new skills. Um, and the second part of it is to reduce the the burden of the current operations that you're into, right? So, and yeah, we understand that, and it's kind of like a balance between, if you think about business, there's something called ambidexterity. Ambidexterity is a balance between exploiting what you have now, making the most of what you have now, and of course exploration, which is development, future development and all these things. So two of the things I do, and I advise HR people a lot on, is one, the manual stuff that you're doing right now, try to find a way to streamline that process so it becomes less tedious. So, if the process has, a lot of forms to fill out and a lot of these things, start pushing something out in Excel, even for like a self-service option. Like what I did with a very tedious process in terms of managing leave. Instead of people sending me their leave data and I have to plug it into Excel, which is a tedious process, I created an Excel worksheet, protected it to a certain extent, and shared it with them so that they plug in the data. So it took a lot of the manual part of that process out for me, so I could just focus on the reporting side of it. There's certain processes, even with forms, you could allow people to fill out forms or have a digital version of your form using Microsoft Forms or any kind of um, utility like that to drop in their own data, and then it comes to you. So you don't have to deal with them. If it saves you, watch. If you save 5 to 10 minutes dealing with every employee for a particular process, if you save that every day, it does add up, right? Yeah, yeah. We actually do have Lynette, a software that does manage leave. But the problem is a lot of people don't apply the process properly. So people will go through the manual process, they will have the manual data and they're not plugging it into the HRIS, which does manage leave. So we get like admin assistants having to send updates, and I will pull that. I haven't even done a reconciliation because it's for a lot of staff, right? So to get the time to do that is a whole process in itself. But it's more about understanding who's doing it, who's not doing it, and trying to encourage them to get involved in it. But I share with them as much as possible so that um having shared files or having like self-service files where they plug in the data themselves and then it comes to you for that analysis side of the process, it does take away a lot of that time that you would have been using for those tedious items. So start looking at your processes and start determining, okay, if employees are coming to me for this and I have to follow this, ask them these questions, why not have something available through SharePoint or through Microsoft Office 365 where they could go to that file, answer the questions, submit it, and it comes to you afterwards. So that way you save that time asking them stuff. You just get in the raw data, you get in the responses. And once you get that, then you could deal with the request or something like that. So there are quite a number of items that you could use, even within the Microsoft suite. Like within the Power Suite, you have Power Automate, which actually you could create forms. You could use Microsoft Lists. Microsoft Lists actually allows people to fill out a form, or you could use Microsoft Forms where you create a simple form with the questions that they have to submit whatever data. Create a simple form, let them click it and submit it, and then you check on that. You have a process where you will check on that. Let's say every afternoon at 1 p.m. you open it up. If there are 10 requests, you deal with those requests. So that way you get more time to focus on what you need to get done rather than the manual, tedious type of things. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So it's all about first identifying those processes that are taking up a lot of your time and figuring out how do I use the technology to push it back to the employees. Let them fill out the initial set of data or the initial requests or all these things without bogging me down with a lot of manual things and paperwork, etc. So that you could get more time for yourself to focus. Even if you get an extra half an hour every day, you could now play around with one or two new features in Power BI, or just take the same data that they're sending you and just drop it in Power BI and play around with it and see what you find. So you are now kind of killing two birds with one stone, where you will learn Power BI by playing around with certain items in it, as well as improving the process, because this might give you the insight that you need and the insight that you might need to share with a manager or some form where this is the status of a process, this is on average how long it takes to complete, and these are the number of requests every day, that kind of thing. So you get to balance the two. Those are some of the techniques that I would have used for getting away from that manual stuff, because for me, it's the cliche, work smart, not hard kind of thing. So if there's something repetitive that you have to do all the time, then figure out how do I just kind of put this in one space and get everybody to get involved in it. And what it does, it sounds big and fancy, the word does sound big and fancy, but sometimes the application is very simple. Automate. So by you sending that form to everybody, and even if they call and you're coming and check it, say, hey, I will send you the link. Send the link to the form. They follow the form, that's saving you time because it's automating it for you. By them putting it in, it's coming to you already completed, and you could just continue the process. And then at some point later there, you will find another point where, oh yeah, I could do another form where I could send them the results or send them these items, and then now also automates it because you don't have to do it for every single person. It's there, it will be generated, and everybody will get it. So these are just some of the little things that I would have done to give myself that breathing room to learn some of these things, because nobody's gonna tell you, hey, your workload too hard or heavy, don't do this. They will say, hey, we need to get this done too. So nobody's telling you, oh, I understand, Kerron, don't worry about that, we'll deal with that. No. They'll say, we have this, we add this to your plate, we want to get this done. We understand you all this to do, but here what we had to get this done too. This is priority, blah blah blah. So all these little techniques I would have used over time to really kind of to overpower all of those things that that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And when we leave some of this stuff, I try to get done, and I actually do get it done because of those little techniques I apply. So listen, feel free. You could always reach out. Let me know what is the process you're looking at and what are the steps. And I could try to give you some ideas on what you could use or how you could kind of get some of these steps to be pushed back onto your stakeholders, or how you could maybe compile these things automatically at certain points, which will kind of make it a little easier, make things a little more tolerable. And in some cases, also provide you with the data that you need to analyze. Because with manual processes, it's very difficult to now start collecting data if the process is this heavy manual thing, right? But if you have these forms and people filling out stuff and sending to you, you could compile data from that you could use to start analyzing. All right, so you're also killing that bird as well. Nice. So yeah, thanks for the question, and of course allowing me because having just general conversation, it's difficult sometimes to answer them. But once I get the questions, I would share my experience and share my tips as we go along. Yeah. So don't forget to ask the questions. I know we were supposed to have a break at some point. I think we missed it. Yeah, we're kind of 10 minutes behind on our break. Other visualization principles, we could probably take if you want, guys, right? I have our lunch break set up probably in the next half an hour or so, right? Our lunch break is set up in the next half an hour. I will show you all how I do some of these things in Power BI, right? So we'll pull the data from the sample data set. I'll show you all. And based on that, when I finish some of those examples, we could take the lunch break, 10 minutes earlier and then kind of start back a bit after, right? So we could adjust as we go. So other principles that, you want to pay attention to, but these are kind of based off the earlier ones too, right? The earlier ones set the priority, and then these others kind of fall in afterwards. So consider your audience, I think, as I was mentioning earlier, know what they are looking for. Include annotations. So you see, like dropping in the little text, as I had mentioned earlier, dropping in a bit of text, annotating some items would come in very handy. Avoid 3D. You notice one of the charts we had earlier was a 3D chart, and you just want to avoid that altogether, right? This one is a very important one. Start bar and columns at 0. I'm going to use an example of this later because this is heavily aligned to our data storytelling part of it, right? And you will see an example of if you don't use the bar and columns at 0, how different that visual becomes and how the narrative can change, right? So, yeah, and it can sometimes be very misleading to your audience. So starting them at 0 is very important. Make labels easy to read. We always have labels, whether it be, columns and, divisions, we have different things that we try to display, but you always want to make them easy to read. If they are difficult to read, now your audience will spend a lot of time trying to decipher, and it takes away from your visual. All right. Use small multiples where necessary. So like in this line here, where we have all these lines and sometimes it will get confusing, you can't just create smaller charts just focusing on each line and allow the user to visually compare them. Or my recommendation is usually use less lines. So just compare 2 items or 3. I don't think anything more than 3 would be necessary. After 3, it starts getting very, very confusing to compare the points. And consider color blindness. This is an important point as well. Use neutral colors. Use colors that are easy to decipher even for those who have some level of color blindness. Use high contrasting colors, so even those they can discern them from each other. And saturation also helps with that, right? So if you use saturation, they would notice what was darker and what's lighter, and they will understand what you're trying to present, even if they can't see the color itself. Yeah. So, right. So this is data storytelling segment. So I'm gonna jump into Power BI. Right. So with Power BI, I'm gonna open up the same data set that we had used for our last masterclass. All right. And we're not going to use like a heavy set of items here, right? I'm just going to use like the employees table with the list of employees and their positions, etc. Their demographics, right? Where their gender, ethnicity, etc. And possibly just the talent table, right? So let me just load that. So just three simple tables. And you'll know that within Power BI, because with each table, I have the employee ID tied towards their demographics, employee ID tied towards their talent profile. We would have a data model where all of these tables are connected. So we are able to analyze all of the data elements across these tables. So once this completes its load, right? So it's just completed its load. Let me show you what the data model looks like. So you'll see that they're all connected using the related field of employee ID. So whenever you're creating your tables, like I had mentioned in last masterclass, ensure that there's always a similar field, a field that could be connected across tables, right? And with any kind of employee data or workforce data, your key field is usually the employee ID, right? So get used to incorporating that into all of your data, all of your tables, so that you could actually connect all of these things together and create models that could give you a lot more insight, right, in terms of where your workforce lies, right, along any kind of dimension you're thinking about, right? So if I come here, let's see what we could build. So the steps within Power BI are pretty simple, and we saw some of these in our last masterclass. There's a couple of stages you're going to go through, all right? So the first step is about determining the visual that you want to create. So you'll notice we have this add a build a visual area, and we have all the different visuals. So understanding what's an effective visual is like the first step. But we start thinking about, okay, what do we want to present? So what are the types of questions that that you would have gotten from data like this? So I have core employee data, right, with their position, their department, their division, their salary grade, their status, their type, right, whether they're administrative, professional, managerial. I also have data on their demographics. So the various employees, their gender, their date of birth, their ethnicity, their education level, right? And of course, with their date of birth, I have their age. So we have all the core, well, the basic demographics of employees. Also have talent information. So which employee with the employee ID, what is their talent, whether they're rising star, high potential, all these things, or what's their performance level, whether they're 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, right? The same range here, 1 to 5, and their potential. So we have a fair amount of dimensions or attributes, as you would say, within your data, right? So there are a ton of questions that we could get from this data. I could probably highlight some of the big ones, right? How much, what's our total active staff, right? What's the breakdown of male versus female in our current staff? Yeah, these are questions that you all will get, right? What about headcount by division or headcount by department? Are these questions that you all will get? Or where are our talented people, those with, let's say, performance at 5? Where are they across the organization? So these are like big questions, high level questions that you might get asked about. And you start thinking now, based on each of these questions, how do I display that in a visual form? All right. So easy, when we think about, some of the big questions, let's say headcount by department or headcount by division, we are looking at distribution, right? And distribution is best displayed as what? If we're showing a distribution of staff, active staff across different divisions, what is the best way to display that? Is it a pie? Is it a line? Is it a bar or column chart? Which one would you all go with if you have to show headcount by division? I would say you have either a column or a bar. What do you all think? No ideas? A bar? Yeah, you could go with a bar. So first, I have the question, which is, of course, what is the distribution or the head count across the various divisions of the organization? So I've created a bar which would highlight How many people are close to retirement? Yeah, we could do that deal. We can distribute by age or by age group. And oh yeah, we could deal you wanna start a good story here, man. We could probably build a story with that. Yeah, no, but that's an interesting question. And it's actually something I did just recently, where the organization I an organization I was helping out, what we actually came up with is one in every four employees are gonna be retiring in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's a huge knowledge loss for the company, right? So then we broke that up, right? And then we broke that up into the numbers across the various divisions and by position. So it now lent towards considerations for succession planning, considerations for internal training, mentoring, um, to mitigate that knowledge loss. Because if they're critical skills, we need to get people for them to train and mentor for continuity for the role and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, definitely. I think we don't do enough of things like that. And when I highlighted that simple stat, that simple one, 1 in 4 of key employees gonna be leaving or retiring in the next couple of years, it raised a couple of eyebrows and it really started that conversation. All right. So yeah, that's a good one. We could always explore. We could explore that as our story. We could actually look at that as our story and build out something on it. I'll show you all some of the techniques I would use to build out that kind of story. Yeah. Nice. So, okay. So we selected our chart type. This is just asking the question about the distribution of staff across the divisions. And the bar is good to show distribution. That's ideal. So after you've selected your graphic or the visual that you want to use, the next thing you want to think about would be, what are the data points you need to display in here? So if the question is distribution of headcount by division, then I would need, in my employees list, and I have a division field. So division would go in my y-axis, right? So I'll have division going up the vertical, the y-axis, and actually let me put it as a column first, and I'll show you all something. Right? So if I put it as a column, the division will go as an x on the x-axis, right? And on the y-axis, I could probably just pull employee ID. So it'll count the number of employees. But I also have to be mindful that my data incorporates inactive staff as well. So after you've pulled the various data points to create the chart, there may be some filtering that you'll have to do on the chart itself, right? So I'm just coming back to my data, and you'll notice within the employee data, I have status as active or inactive, right? So right now, my chart is just showing me everything because I didn't do any filtering on it. So I would now have to filter this chart to focus specifically on active staff, right? Current staff. So I'm going to come now, take status, and you'll notice we have a filters area here. So there's a simple process, a roadmap in terms of creating visuals on Power BI. First, select the visual that you think would be most effective. Second, determine the key data points that you want to use or the fields that you want to use, right? Third would be incorporating any filters that you deem necessary. And then the fourth step is more customizing, right? The actual visual itself. So I'm going to use status as a filter on this visual. So filters on this visual. So I can add it here, drop it on add data fields. And here we'll see status, and I'll only choose active. So you see now it's filtering the chart to show only active staff, because we want to ensure that creating visuals being effective with the type, etc., but we have to also ensure accuracy of the data itself, right? So I could always like collapse these, right, if I don't need to use them anymore. So we finished 3 steps. Choose on the visual, determine the data values, right? And of course, filtered it according to what we need. Now you'll notice that there's a lot of clutter in here. This is the default view of the chart. By default, they provide grid lines, they provide a default header, they provide axes, right, with titles of the axes and all these things. So we can customize this, and we could apply some of the principles that I would have shared earlier with regard to how do we declutter, how do we allow for focus, and all these things. All right. So first things first, let's look at, properly naming this chart. So I could come back now. We have, if you look on the panes over here, you'll see format. So you see format visual. So I can now format this visual, format anything within the visual. All right. So I could go to, so let me just select the chart, right? And here we're gonna get all of the areas that we could edit this visual. You don't have to edit everything, and you don't have to do it for every single chart, but there's some key ones that you'll want to pay attention to, right? So like in this case, we're looking at the X and Y axes, and we're looking at the title. So first thing here, let's look at the title, and you'll see the title is a default, so you'll see the count of employee ID by division. But we could change this, and we could just put, based on the question that was asked, headcount by division, right? And of course, you just format this to make it stand out so that they understand what's the purpose of the visual, right? You could just change alignment. We could do all these things right here with the title. Editing the title of your visual is always like your first step, right? So you have all of the options right here to edit your title. So the title covered, I could just collapse that little pane. And the next thing that we want to do, we were looking at decluttering, right? So taking out the clutter, we want to look at the axes. So we have the x-axis and the y-axis. So let me start with the y-axis. The y-axis shows this title here, count of employees, and then it has the numbers that shows the actual count, right? The distribution or the head count by division. I could take out the title simply because the title of the entire visual, which has headcount by division, already highlights to us what this figure represents. So we know that each of these columns here basically will represent headcount or a number. So there's no need to show, if I put back the title shows count of employee ID. So I can just take that out. That's clutter. That's just distracting. I could also, even in the x-axis, I could take out the title as well. So you see, I expand the x-axis, title here is on, I could take it off. So you see, I've already cleaned up that area. Now, I'm also seeing some grid lines here for the axis, for the y-axis. And you'll notice, if I ask you all, was the headcount for finance? If I ask you, was the headcount for finance, you have to take a little time and try to read it. But then we were talking about labels, right? And how to make labels, clear to read. So in this case, these labels are pretty small. So if I am here in my x-axis and I'm seeing with the values, right? I'm just going to increase the size of the values. So you see here, we're seeing the divisions increasing in size. But the more we try to make it legible, it takes a bit away from the chart, right? So there's something else that we might need to consider here, especially because we have some long names, right? So we have some long labels. Look at it: information technology, sales and marketing, etc. So what we might want to consider is a slight adjustment afterwards. But let's do some of the basic stuff first, right? So it's a little more legible. But if I ask you all, was the headcount for finance or was the headcount for labs? Are you able to answer that question very quickly? Or is your audience able to answer that question very quickly? Right? It's difficult, right? And we're kind of seeing that labs and finance fairly similar, but we're not too sure. And we are, and if you all notice something, Power BI automatically sorted it, right? So you're seeing now, we're seeing the distribution from the highest headcount or production all the way down to corporate, which will have the smallest headcount. So that's a good thing that it does. But we could adjust those things too if we want to, right? But what I will do is in terms of data values, so you see data labels. So you see I'm scrolling down the options here, and I'm seeing data labels down to the bottom. Right now, data labels are off. Data labels help us a lot in terms of creating effective visuals, right? So get into the habit of considering putting data labels in and cleaning out the other clutter. All right. So I'll put on data labels and you are automatically going to see all the numbers pop up here. Of course, this is default for Power BI. So I'm actually now seeing very barely that there are 32 in finance and there's 33 in labs. So you see very quickly, I could discern what's happening with the data. Can you add values on the bars to assist? Right, well, right, that's the values there, right, Padmini? So that's the data values. So what I could do now, if I have these data values, of course I could format them, right? So I'll just go to data labels, expand on it. And here you'll see what all of these options are under data labels. So I have the value here, so I could expand on that. And this is where I can make it larger. Right? So I'm making it a little more legible. Yeah. And I could also do a number of things in terms of where to display the units. What type of units to display, if there's any decimal places, if these were like values or decimals, etc. Right? Nice. Now also I could look at, all right, so let me just minimize that. So I'm keeping it simple. Now that I have these data labels for my bars, there's no need for this y-axis, right? So I'm just going to go up to my y-axis, values off. Here we go. What y'all think? Looks a lot neater, right? And this is fairly clean. It's fairly clean, right? Compared to what we started with. Now, my little problem now is this other thing. You see how we have the labels here for our divisions? Let me see. Yeah, it's much easier to read, right? The labels for the divisions, because of the angle and because of the size of the actual values themselves, it's not most appropriate to have things on an orientation. You want to make it easier to read, right? Is it easy to read something at a 45-degree angle? This is not even 45. It's probably close to 60 degrees, right? So what we could do, whenever we have like very long values and labels, you want to keep them as horizontal as possible. So column chart in this case is not the most appropriate, right? What we will do is I will turn it into a bar chart. Yeah, I'll turn it into a bar chart where we put all of the long labels on the vertical axis so it keeps them horizontal, right? So this way, it's much easier to read. It's much easier to identify those values. Now, of course, if I want to make these a bit larger to make them easier to read, I can. Now, it will only last up to a point, right? So notice, if it is I increase it more than 12, if I try to increase it, we're more than 13 right now. So I'm on 13 and it's okay. But if I needed to make it larger, you'll notice like information technology, a part of it missing, right? Because it's a bit too large for the space that was allocated towards it. This is a little trick a lot of Power BI people don't apply, right? So let's say I need it to be 15. So you see at 15, we could see this very clearly, right? We could see this pretty clearly. But you'll notice, and it's not about wrapping. So what it is, we could apply a certain amount of space for the labels and a certain amount of space for the data. So check it here, Tamika. So you see where I have values here and I have the font size and I can do the formatting here, right? If you notice here, there's an area here called maximum width. And right now it's at 25%. But if I increase it to, let's say, 30%, you see what it does? It creates this invisible space that's allocated for the labels and the space that's allocated for the data values. Yeah. So if you realize that, you really need it, it's a bit larger. So you see right now, I've reached what? I could reach 16 now and it's still fitting because I allocated 30% of the space. But I could come now and say, hey, I want maybe 35% of the space. And you see that subtle shift. If I start increasing the size, it will push it to the point where it's 35% of the space, right? So you could have larger labels, more legible labels, and this will, of course, increase the effectiveness of your visual. You see how simple these things are? But the principles behind them are very sound. And these are the subtle things that you would look at. You'll look at somebody else's dashboard or somebody else's visual and be like, wow, it works so well. How can I really get my visuals to do these things? And it's just following very simple principles. So like we all think that it's all kind of fancy bells and whistles and it. But these techniques are so very simple. And when you do these subtle changes to your visuals and you start sharing it with your audience, you will actually see the difference in terms of how their feedback is, how they respond to you, and what you're providing to them. Now, what I could also do is, so these are just the values. So I could just kind of probably just bring it back to about 15. I think 15 is fine. And that's it for my y-axis. So I'm done with that. I don't have anything on the x because I took off all the values. So I have that cleaned out. But let's say my data labels. I might want to do some other stuff in here. So let's say like position, for instance. Now, it's not the most ideal example, but I'm just going to show you all how it could be done, right? When you are placing your figures, now I could go down to the value and make it bold, make them stand out, right? So they're actually standing out a little more now because you're seeing the figures, right? But I could position these items either inside of the bars, right? So check this. I could go automatically, it goes on the outside of the bar by default. This is default. But sometimes you want to make it a little more effective. And what's something here, right? Do you all think this is very effective right now? So like if I say, was the headcount for finance? And you're seeing 32. Was the headcount for sales and marketing? Was the headcount for production? You could see the values very quickly, right? And it's much more effective than how it was before. Yeah? What y'all think? I could show, not yet. We don't have to add color yet, unless we start building a narrative. But I could show you something else. So do you think Tamika, that if I ask you, okay, what's the headcount for production? It's quick and easy. It's quick and easy to get to the value, right? Because you could look at production and you go across and you see 165. Do you think I can make it even easier for you? Do you think there's any possible way to make this even easier for you to get the headcount figure? And I think because I'm asking this question, you might probably say yes, there is an easier way. Watch out this other technique that you can use, but it's not appropriate all the time. it's not appropriate all the time. And this is also a good example of it, right? That it may not be most appropriate. But what's something here? So we have the values at the default on the end of the bars. But you'll notice if I ask you about production, you have to go all the way over here for that 165. Or with warehouse, all the way over here. Now, yes, it does take you very quickly. It doesn't take you very long to do it. But what if I can make it even more effective? So I could change the position of the value from the automatic outside in to, let's look at this, inside base. What y'all think about that now? So you don't even need to go all the way to the end of the bar. You have the figure right next to the division. And this is inside base. So it pulls the value all the way in. So you don't even have to travel all the way across, right? You see, it's even more effective. But as I said, it's not appropriate in every instance. Take a look at corporate. Because the bar is too small to accommodate the value, it will not show it. So it's not appropriate in all cases. It's tempting to use. But what I may want to consider, let's say, reducing the size of the value in the data label, right? Let's see. If I make it small enough, at some point the 5 might fit. But you see, in this example, it's not possible at all, right? So I'm happy that this chart actually accommodated this with corporate, because while it's tempting to use it, was the first principle of visualization and effective visual, show the data. So if I'm not able to show the data for corporate, I'm not creating an effective visual here, right? So keep it on the outside. So let's say outside in, outside N is the default. So this way you're able to see the data. While it's not the most practical or the most effective based on what we've seen that could be done, because of the context of this visual, we have no choice. But let's say, for instance, the management team only wanted to see, let's say, the top 5 headcount divisions. So they don't want to see all. They want to see the top 5 because these are the majority, the larger divisions, right? So they're not really concerned too much about the smaller ones. So what we can do, we can further filter this, and then it can make it appropriate for us to apply that technique, right? So if they want to see, let's say, just the top 5 highest head counts, then we could do that. We have to apply a filter to the visual. So I'll go to filters, right? And then I'll see division is all, count of employee is all. But if I go to division, I could do some basic filtering where I could eyeball it, right? There are a couple of techniques here too, right? I could eyeball it and say, okay, we just want to see production, warehouse, sales, maintenance, and labs. And come and just check these off, and it would now show me only those. But I think we all know our workforce data will constantly change, right? So the top 5 today might not be the top 5 6 months from now. And I don't want to just stick it to those constants. So what we do now, we don't have just the basic filtering, this basic filtering. We have some advanced filtering and some top N. Top N is what we could look at here. Top N is usually things a lot of people don't take on, right? So there's a very useful feature within Power BI. So top N, we want to show the top 5, but not the top 5 for anything, but the top 5 based on head count, right? Based on count of employee ID. So what I'm going to do, we could add the data field here that we want to create that top 5 for. So top 5 employee ID, drop that in here. So you see count of employee ID. And if I apply that filter, it will now filter it down to the top 5 divisions by head count. So what's interesting, usually a question I get, is it that you could apply any data value here? The answer is yes. If the data value is related to what we are displaying, so I might want to show, let's say, the top 5 divisions by, let's say, I don't know, average tenure, for instance, right? I could work out average tenure, drop it in here, and show the top 5 divisions by average tenure. Yeah. So you could filter top N by almost any related data. If the data is related, you can actually filter it like that. So you don't have to go and find average tenure, work that out and drop it in the chart here, and let us see. We could see head count by average tenure. Yeah, how cool is that, right? So you could do a number of things here by filtering your diagram. And now that I filtered this, I could come back to the values, right? I could come back to our values and look at their position, right? So my data labels, I can now put them on the inside base. And here I'm seeing all of the values right by the divisions itself. Yeah? What y'all think? So you see that Power BI is not an exceptionally difficult application to work with. It just has so many features that, you just had to, as you are playing around with it, there are areas that you're going to focus on and areas or features that you're going to be using very, very often. Yeah. So it's not very difficult. How do you keep related documents together? What means, Amika? In terms of, okay, it seems the data changes can impact usability. Not really. Because what we'll have to do is create filters, use certain data attributes to filter your data. So we can filter, let's say I can have filter headcount by division in 2022, and then I can have another page. So here you could have multiple pages right at the bottom. And so I could have like a 2022 dash, I could have a 2023, I could do a comparative. If the data changes, we click refresh here and it'll update, right? If the data does change. But it depends on how we want to filter our data. If we filter our data the way we need to, We could either have visuals that continuously change based on how the data changes, or if we filter it accordingly, we could only have data for a consistent area or a segment of your data without changing. I hope that I answer your question there. So the filters actually accommodate the changes within the visuals. Did I answer your question? Or you can probably come on the mic and let me know. Okay. All right. Yeah, because it's based on how you filter it, because data will constantly change, but you will dictate how your charts will adjust or update themselves, right? Based on filters. So filters actually accommodate that. If you see like how I have top N here, right? Okay, I think I know what you're talking about. So let's say this, right? Let me create a copy of this. So I have 2 copies of headcount by division. And what I'm gonna do, let me just change the color of the bars here. Right, so I have 2 different bars. Let's do this one. Right. So this one is, let me change the title. So this is top 5 headcount by division. That's top 5. So I was using the top 5 filter for this one. Right. So this one will only show the top 5 headcount no matter what. So if a division changes and a lot of people from labs move across to wherever, and labs is no longer in the top 5, then that's fine, right? This other one, which shows headcount by division, we could actually manually select these without it having to automatically update every time. So what's something? So if I come to my filters, and instead of this being a top N, I could say basic filtering and manually select the ones that I want. So as I said, we have production, warehouse, sales and marketing. Where's warehouse here? Sales and marketing, maintenance, and labs. Right? So this one is not going to be impacted by the top N. So let's say, for instance, finance made the top N. Finance will come in here and labs will drop out. So this chart will update itself based on the top N that we set up, because it allows for more flexibility. By me manually choosing these 5 divisions for this chart, this is not going to change. The data will be updated. So if the headcount changes for any one of these, it will change. But it's not going to change the 5 divisions that are the focus of this visual. So it's all based on how you filter your chart to ensure that it adjusts accordingly based on what you think you need for the chart. Hopefully that makes sense there, Tamika. I think the big answer here is really all about how we filter and how we determine the values, whether we allow the values to change based on a top 5 or based on some kind of other adjustment, or if we are manually, selecting these to make it a bit more static. Make sense? I think what I'll also show attrition numbers over the past 4 years could be yes, it can. It can. Yeah. All right, guys. So yeah, we will definitely do a little more later today, and I'll show you how I'll do some filtering and maybe show some interaction across the different visuals when we look at the storytelling aspect. So I think it's our lunch break right now. You'll see how time does fly, right? When you're having fun. All right. I was looking at from, of course, 11:30 to 12:15, which of course from non-Jamaican time is 12:30 to 1:15. Yeah, how that sounded? Sounds good to you guys? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have an event to go to later today, and that's why I kind of pushed up the schedule a little bit. But I think we're still able to cover everything. Because it's not totally technical and all these things, we should still be able to cover everything. And I'm also still opening the doors for you all to ask me questions, reach out to me if you all need anything, any additional help or direct assistance. So it's one of the benefits of being in the pilot group. Yeah. So I'll see you all at 1:15 local time, 12:15 Jamaican time, and we will continue by diving into data storytelling and, of course, the data culture. So have a good lunch, guys. See you all in a bit. Yes, 12:15 Jamaican time. Thanks, Dale. Sure, Tamika, that's not a problem. What resources for learning? Okay, Shavona. What I will do, I will in the group, in the WhatsApp group, I will send out a few of those really good channels that you could look at to capture Power BI, like YouTube. YouTube is a really good resource. There are one or two others, like Microsoft itself, because they have a learning portal. But I think the YouTube guys make it a little more practical, more hands-on. You could follow the videos and learn as you go along. So I could share a couple of those, maybe some direct videos with you, and some channels that you could subscribe to where you could get access to more videos. Yeah, great. No problem. You're welcome. So I'll catch you all in about 45 minutes or so. Have a good one, guys.